Hey, how's it going, my friends? So I'm back. This is Lord Abed. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Let's just go at it at this chapter 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read it and then I'll make brief pauses when I see there's an important question. But sometimes I just go and read and then I just do the questions on the comment section. So make sure you're trying to answer, guys, because right now many of you are not answering, but it's because I just started with this book and political theory in general. But in the future, I'd like you guys to be more active. And also, if you're watching this in the future, like, make sure you just answer the question. And honestly, it would make me very happy if you guys could just leave long answers, like a paragraph answer to show your commitment and engagement. So let's go at it, guys. The Experience of Politics, Part 3, Justice, Freedom, and Democracy. So politics, being largely talk, must dramatize itself. A king is in some sense just one human being, among others. Civil order in a monarchy requires that we dramatize what is to be a king, and this is the point of crowns, thrones, specters, guards of honor, regalia, and other symbols, some of which are used by the prime ministers and presidents of our own egalitarian times. Most political expression is metaphorical. The state we saw was a body politic. We may now consider it as a ship. The ship metaphor lies behind the very word of government, which comes from the medieval Latin gubernacum, a rudder. Politics is the art of navigating a ship of state. By what signs should the statesman steer? The obvious answer is he should be guided by ideals, distant beacons of excellence at which we should all aim. Ideals are often the concepts by which political parties identify themselves. Conservatives, for example, owe a great allegiance to tradition, liberals to freedom, socialists to equality. But the supreme navigational tool of politics trumping each of these is the thing called justice, which in the first masterpiece of political philosophy, Plato's Republic, was the regulative virtue which determined the place of all the other virtues. The actual word justice comes from the Latin ius, which covers both law and right. In this famous dialogue, Plato began by showing that justice meant giving every person his due, but went on to demonstrate that this formula meant nothing until one could explain what was due to people. This required nothing less than sketching the entire structure of a polis. It turned out that justice, on Plato's view, was fitting people in place in the state for which their nature equipped them. Rulers were thus revealed as philosophers, for only philosophers possess a rational understanding of human nature. The basic principle was complementary. Workers, warriors, and philosopher rulers must each stick to their own tasks. Plato's Republic is sometimes taken to be an utopia. That is a picture of some ideal condition, but this is a mistake. For one thing, desire differ, and there is no reason why I should find your desires admirable or yours mine. What is merely desire has no intellectual force, whereas what is desirable moves the argument onto an objective plane, beyond desire. More profoundly, however, justice is an ideal, and nothing in the complex real world in which we live can actually be an ideal. In navigational terms, justice is a star to steer by, and when you steer by a star, you don't aim to arrive there. This point is sometimes made by saying that justice is a normative concept, which means that we ought to take our bearings from it. To say that justice requires certain policy or that some existing situation is unjust is to propose action. When we talk about justice, then we might be describing an ideal, sketching an utopia, stating a grievance, or advancing some policy, or indeed doing a variety of other things. The essential thing about justice and other ideals is that they function in many different ways, and it's important always to ask, in any particular case, which function is being performed. It is just, for example, that the right to vote should be limited to people with property or adult males. It is just that one nation should be ruled by another? Is it just that the state religion should be enforced on everyone? These questions have been passionately debated in terms of justice, and different answers have been given in different generations. It is obvious, then, that the content of justice will, at least to some extent, depend on current opinion. It happens that most people will have a clear answer to each of the questions I have used in illustration, and will therefore be tempted to think that human beings move steadily from narrower to broader and more defensible ideas of justice as time goes by. This is one of our most satisfying illusions. And this is what is now called, guys, progressivism. The idea that we're always moving towards some end goal where everybody's free or everybody has attained justice or equality. And Hegel started this train of thought, Marx continuing, and now with a new left, there is this similar idea. All that experience actually seems to demonstrate is that each generation is pleased to discern that it has last arrived at decently absolute moral and political judgments. However democratic a state constitution may be, for example, the participation of its citizens goes up and down according to nothing more too profound than circumstance. The citizens of classical times participated in politics more than those in the Middle Ages, and the citizens of Italians early in the Middle Ages more than in the later periods. Things swing back and forth. Recent generations have tended to make an absolute out of the belief that moral standards are relative and all cultures are equal. Only imagine that this, at last, the wisdom of the ages. Politics is the endless public disagreement about what justice requires. Aristotle taught the instability in constitutions is caused by the passion for equality, and went on to characterize justice as a state in which honor and office are distributed according to the contribution different groups make to the welfare of the polis. According to the contribution that different groups make to the welfare of the polis, numbers, wealth, and merit must all find a place, and a true polity would include this polis. It's a city, would include both democratic and oligarchic elements. Here the philosopher is merely telling us what justice is. He's not giving us advice on how to achieve it, and his formula would hardly be of much use if he were. And that reveals to us yet another way in which the idea like justice can function. It can supply a philosophical explanation of what we already know, for there is one great defect of the navigational metaphor we have been using. It suggests that justice is to be found in some place we have not yet reached. This is quite wrong. We already know what justice is, and our societies already are, in certain ways, just. If they were not so, we would not recognize it. Justice is, in other words, not merely something ahead of us and useful in navigating, it is also something behind us which tells us both what we are and where we come from. That is why political life is full of people demanding justice on some point or another, with new ideas or changed circumstances. Conditions which previously seemed natural come to provoke demands for reform, and justice is a formula for demanding reform. In the rhetorical role, the term can be cheapened and trivialized. Available to everybody with a demand or a grievance, it can focus passions which lead to a descent into civil order. Whole societies can collapse into civil wars because two sides whistle up the idea of justice to support their contentions. It happened in the United States in 1860, and Hobbes thought it caused the English Civil War. He therefore followed another philosophical tradition which plays down justice as a basis of order and insists that the real issue is peace, assigning the absolute responsibility for deciding what is just to the sovereign. Hobbes described that just man with brutal formality, as he hath in his action observed the laws of his country, thus denying the validity of people consulting their conscience in order to discover some higher justice in conflict with current policy. It is not that philosophers such as Hobbes did not care about justice or conscience. Where are kingdoms without justice by great robberies? Asked St. Augustine. For those who earthly justice could be nothing better than a pale imitation of heaven. It was simply that they thought of justice as inflammable material ignitable by the sparks of passion, and therefore best kept under philosophical lock and key. The way in which ideals function in political talk may be illustrated by the idea which we may call indifferently either liberty, after a Roman god liber, a version of the Dionysus, or freedom, after the Germanic term, those dear to the head of the household who were not slaves. Freedom functions as all as a term of self-identification, identifying, for example, classes of people who do not have a master, and sometimes republican constitution without monarchical authority. In its broadest meaning, distinguishes those ruled politically from those ruled despotically, and it was this meaning to which the West appealed in itself as a free world, as against the despotic rule of communist parties in Russia and elsewhere. Here then we have an ideal term towards which we do not need to navigate, because as with justice we have it already. Our task rather is to keep it in good repair what we already have. The most obvious way to construe freedom is negatively. It means not being restrained. In political context, this means not having to live one's life under a ruler who has arbitrary powers. It is an easy sophism, however, to argue that if freedom means not being restrained, and if I'm, as it were, restrained from doing what I want by lack of money, from poverty, is unfreedom, then poverty is. In this way, the term freedom can slip into power, and we're well launched on the road towards positioning some despot who will abolish poverty and equalize our power. Again, Hobbes was no less suspicious of freedom than he was of justice, and he defined it very carefully as a silence of the law. One was free, that is to say, were not constrained legal rule one to conform. The more familiar European tradition, however, has been to define freedom as a condition of living under the rule of law, by contrast with subjugation to everyday man. Alright guys, so what's going on is, this is Isaiah Berlin's distinction between positive freedom, the freedom to be able to do things. For example, the freedom to buy some nice shoes, because you have the money to do it, and the freedom that most conservatives and perhaps libertarians like Minogue are arguing is just that freedom not to be constrained, like the freedom that people won't steal from you your shoes. So it's negative freedom in the sense that you are not being constrained by a despot to take things away from you, but it's not positive in a sense that you are given the tools to achieve your goal, in this case to get new shoes. So it's that distinction. Yet even this sensible view conceals possible problems. If freedom is nothing else but the absence of restraint, then how can we be free at the point where a law restrains us from doing what we want? This was a view taken by Hobbes and his follower Jeremy Bentham, but the point at issue requires us to realize that a law, by contrast with a command, is purely abstract and leaves the discretion unfettered. Most people, for example, are not powerfully constrained by sanctions against solving one's problems by murder. They grow up instantly excluding it as an acceptable option. As they cruise life boundless and bottomless sea, the passengers on a ship of a particular state might well decide that they want to steam towards something they do not enjoy, or enjoy but imperfectly. Such a decision assumes that they can enjoy the ideals that attract them. This is a profound mistake. The reality is that our character and our culture, at a given limit, what is possible for us, only certain sort of people can enjoy certain sort of ideals. Criminals, for example, are not very good at justice, though they often have remarkable capacities for honor. I don't get that specific reference, guys, but I'm just going to continue reading. Against the Western or Anglo ideal of freedom is irresistibly attractive to many in other civilizations, but it depends on forms of self-control which are not easily acquired. Reckless and visionary theories have persuaded many to discern a destination adjacent to freedom called liberation, and it has induced excitable passengers on leaky ships of state to agree to violent changes of direction. Some have foundered, and not surprisingly, because as Rousseau and others pointed out, when slavery ruled, they would not create a free society, but merely change their masters. The parallel for freedom is the fact that it can only be a possession we already have. As an ideal to navigate by, it must always be an illusion. The ideal of democracy has many features similar to that of liberty. Beginning life as a humble constitutional term, it has grown that it has threatened to take over the territories of both freedom and justice. It's easy to illustrate the simpler ways in which democracy might to do this. No one can be free, Rousseau argued, who does not participate in making the laws under which he lives. Rousseau himself was too sensitive a philosopher to move directly from this proposition to the idea that only democracies are free. He thought democracy, a constitution, required gods to work it, but many others have. There are many ways in which democracy might digest justice. Though the idea that only democracies are just would have to be implausible, implication that all but a tiny handful of societies in history have been unjust. I'll reread that again. So there are many ways in which democracy might digest justice. Though the idea that only democracies are just would have implausible implications that all but a tiny handful of societies in history have been unjust. So he is arguing that almost all societies are unjust because they don't have democracy. Most, but not all of them, because some have democracy. Democracy supremely illustrates a way in which political ideas have in the modern world expanded beyond the area of the state and been set up a criteria of value in those other associations which, as we saw, constitute a modern life. A democratic society, for example, might be thought as a contradiction in terms, but has come to mean a society in which everybody leads the same kind of life and disposes of similar resources. A democratic culture is one liberated from elitist standard of what constitutes beauty. Sometimes there's even talk of democratizing the economy, which generally means turning factories into worker cooperatives. Even manners can be democratic, and democracy was a term that French historian Alexis de Tocqueville used to describe the American society, which he thought would supersede the aristocratic customs of Europe. The society in which Westerners currently live are all in basic ways just, free, and democratic. These terms, when elaborated by philosophers, possibly describe our philosophical foundations, but each of these terms can be refined by philosophical and rhetoricians, each in a different way, so as to shimmer before us not as costumes and conditions we already enjoy, but as new directions we might take. They turn into social life, justice, liberation, and real or strong democracy, and guide our strivings. One type of politic is the navigation by ideals. The problem is, of course, then that you can only steer by one star, not by several scattered over the heavens. That means that those who promote the claim of one star rather than another must show that it is one star which will lead to the satisfaction of all our strivings. But since many of our strivings are mutually contradictory, we must give up either some of our strivings or some of their destinations. And that is why the direction of politics must always be the outcome of changing judgment about conflicting desirability. Ideals are important in politics, but in the end, realities must determine where we go and how fast we travel. Alright guys, so let me go back to this idea. So I just find this interesting. A democratic society, for example, might be thought of a contradiction in terms, but has to mean a society in which everybody leads the same kind of life and disposes of similar resources. A democratic culture is one liberated from elitist standards of what constitutes beauty. So this is what's quote-unquote a dangerous idea in a way, because we have a democratic society, but now with progressive movements, they're trying to create a democratic culture when there's no standards. So it's the type of non-standard society where what is beautiful, it no longer is. The social engineering element, which I think is very relevant and very interesting. So anyway, my friends, this is Lord Labed. Thank you very much. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I'm going to ask this question, the difference between a democratic society and a democratic culture, and I'll expand. Thanks a lot, guys. See you in the next video. Take care.